At 9:15 on March 18, 1945, the air was a frozen shroud over Nether Warsbach. First Lieutenant Jack Treadwell pressed his face into the icy German soil, tasting copper and grit. Ahead, the impregnable Siegfried Line loomed like a concrete beast waiting to be fed. 8 of his men had just been cut down, their bodies marking the start of a 300-yard kill zone. The Siegfried Line wasn't just a wall. It was 630 kilometers of strategic nightmare. 18,000 concrete bunkers with 2-foot-thick walls stood in interlocking rows. Every blade of grass on that hillside had been pre-measured by German gunners. For Fox Company, the hill was a geometric guarantee of mass suicide. Jack Treadwell was 25 years old, but his eyes held the weight of 511 days of combat. He had survived the mud of Sicily, the blood of Salerno, and the graveyards of Anzio. He knew the sound of the MG-42 of Hitler's buzzsaw, and he knew it was hungry today. The tactical math was simple. Stay put and die by artillery, or move and die by lead. There were no trees to hide behind, no rocks to shield a man's chest. The Germans had cleared the vegetation years ago to ensure a perfect field of fire. 8 men had tried to crawl forward an hour earlier, dragging grenades through the frost. Treadwell watched them all go down in less than 15 seconds of concentrated fire. 6 pillboxes controlled the crest of the hill like the teeth of a saw. Each was connected by a hidden network of trenches for instant reinforcement. Standard doctrine called for air support, but the skies were empty and gray. The artillery had already tried to hit them, leaving nothing but shallow, useless craters. The lieutenant studied the gray slits of the bunkers, looking for a single point of failure. He realized that the coordination was too perfect. Someone was directing the fire. If he could kill the brain, the body of the defense might finally wither. It was a theory that could only be tested with a human life, his own. "Wait until you see what happens at the 12-minute mark," the narrator whispers. Treadwell set down his binoculars and checked the heavy magazine of his Thompson. He stuffed 4 grenades into his pockets, feeling the heavy iron weight against his legs. He told his men to cover him. Then he did the one thing no one expected. He stood up. He didn't run because running would leave him breathless for the fight at the top. He didn't crawl because the wounded men on the slope were running out of time. He simply walked, a lone figure in olive drab against a world of gray and white. The German gunners froze for a split second, stunned by the sheer audacity of the target. Then the hillside erupted in a symphony of violence as every gun turned toward him. The MG-42s began their 1,200 drown-per-minute scream, tearing the ground at his feet. Dirt geysers exploded inches from his boots, spraying frozen mud onto his uniform. Treadwell kept walking, his heart a steady drum against the chaos of the buzzsaw. The Thompson submachine gun felt like 10 pounds of cold steel in his grip. Its effective range was 50 yards, nearly useless against concrete from this distance. His real weapons were the 4 grenades swinging in his pockets like pendulums. He used the shallow artillery craters as waypoints, never staying in one for more than a breath. German snipers on the ridge adjusted their Kar 98K rifles, squinting through Zeiss optics. They were trained to hit moving targets, but Treadwell's pace was unnervingly steady. The wind on the ridge caught their rounds, whistling past his helmet by mere inches. Adrenaline and the steep incline made the marksman miss the man who wouldn't run. He was 100 yards away now, entering the most concentrated zone of interlocking fire. He angled his approach, using a slight fold in the earth to mask his lower body. By choosing this path, he traded fire from 3 bunkers for a heavier focus from 1. In the mathematics of survival, this was the only favorable equation left to him. The first pillbox loomed, a low-slung concrete block with a narrow, dark firing slit. Muzzle flashes strobed from the opening, illuminating the gray, weathered concrete. Treadwell could see the jagged scars where Allied shells had hit and bounced off. He was 50 yards away the range where his Thompson finally had something to say. The machine gun inside the first bunker suddenly stopped to swap a hot barrel. Treadwell didn't hesitate, burst into a dead sprint, boots slipping on the slick grass. He reached the side of the bunker and slammed his back against the cold, vibrating wall. He was safe from the other bunkers now, but he was inches away from the enemy. He could hear the Germans shouting inside. The frantic metallic clatter of the MG-42. They knew he was right outside the door, but the aperture was too narrow for them to aim. Treadwell reached for a grenade, then stopped it might bounce back in the wind. He decided on a more direct method of introduction for the men inside. He shoved the muzzle of his Thompson into the 18-inch firing slit and pulled the trigger. The roar inside the concrete room was deafening as .45 caliber rounds ricocheted off the walls. It was a whirlwind of lead and dust that left the defenders with nowhere to hide. The firing stopped, replaced by the sound of coughing and panicked German pleas. 4 soldiers stumbled out of the rear entrance, their faces pale with shock and dust. One gripped a wounded shoulder, while the others looked at Treadwell like he was a ghost. He gestured with his gun toward the American lines, sending them stumbling down the hill. He had no time to search them. The other 5 bunkers were already zeroing in on his position. Rounds from the neighboring pillboxes began to hammer the concrete he was leaning against. The Germans realized their flank had been compromised and were desperate to kill the intruder. Treadwell didn't take cover inside the bunker that would make him a trapped target. He dove into the shallow trench that connected the first bunker to the second. The trench was 4 feet deep, filled with frozen mud and the smell of spent brass. As he ran, German riflemen leaned out of their slits to fire down into the ditch. Bullets bit into the wooden duckboards at his feet, throwing splinters into the air. He was 30 yards from the second bunker, which was significantly larger than the first. The next 60 seconds would decide the fate of the entire battalion, the narrator warns. This second pillbox had a wider aperture, suggesting a heavier, crew-served weapon. Treadwell stayed low, his lungs burning from the cold air and the frantic exertion. He armed his second grenade, feeling the spring of the spoon against his palm. He tossed the M2 fragmentation grenade with the precision of an Oklahoma ballplayer. It vanished into the dark slit, and Treadwell pressed his face into the dirt of the trench. A muffled thump shook the ground, followed by a plume of gray smoke from the aperture. He was up and moving before the dust could even settle on the trench floor. A German officer emerged from the rear, his uniform crisp but his spirit utterly broken. Treadwell realized from the insignia that this was the sector commander he had hunted. With the brain captured, the German defense began to stagger like a headless giant. He sent the officer down the hill, then turned his gaze toward bunker number 3. The third pillbox sat across an exposed ridge with no trench to provide a covered path. To reach it, he would have to run through the most visible part of the entire hill. The 3 remaining bunkers were all operational, and they were all looking for him. Jack Treadwell took a deep breath of freezing air and broke into a full-speed dash. He was a silhouette against the gray sky, the perfect target for a dozen machine guns. The frozen ground erupted in fountains of ice as a hail of lead chased his heels. He could feel the air displacement of rounds passing so close they hummed. One bullet actually tugged at his jacket sleeve, but the lead failed to find his skin. He dove the final 5 yards, his shoulder hitting the concrete with a bone-jarring thud. He was safe from bunker 3, but the others were sparking rounds off the wall. Routine had set in now. Arm the grenade, count the fuse, thread the needle. The explosion inside was followed by 3 more dazed Germans surrendering to the ghost. 11 prisoners were now stumbling toward Fox Company, who watched in disbelief. Treadwell's solo assault had done what an entire artillery barrage could not. He saw bunker number 4, the communications hub for the remaining defenses. If he took this one, the entire ridgeline would effectively belong to the Americans. Below, the men of Fox Company were no longer pressed into the mud in terror. Sergeants were shouting orders, and riflemen were checking their M1 Grands with new life. Treadwell's courage had acted like a lightning bolt, shattering their collective paralysis. They began to rise, ready to follow the man who was currently winning a war by himself. He moved into the communication trench, the Thompson, ready for any corner ambush. The Germans in the fourth bunker had watched 3 of their neighboring positions fall in less than 10 minutes. They had heard the explosions and the rhythmic, terrifying bark of Treadwell's gun. Fear was traveling through the Siegfried Line faster than Treadwell could walk. When he reached the 4th pillbox, he didn't even have to fire a single shot. He shoved the muzzle into the slit, and the Germans inside scrambled for the rear exit. 4 more men emerged, their weapons abandoned in the dark corners of their fort. The count was now 15 prisoners, and the impregnable line was a sieve. 2 bunkers remained, but the Germans inside were now looking downhill at Fox Company. They saw a wave of American infantry surging up the slope, inspired by their leader. The gunners were faced with a choice: fire at the wave, or stop the man on their flank. They chose the wave, which was the final mistake they would ever make that day. Treadwell used their distraction to navigate the final stretch of the connection trench. He found the door to Bunker 5 standing partially open, a sign of total panic. He held his last grenade but didn't pull the pin, waiting to see what the shadows held. A German helmet appeared, followed by trembling hands reaching for the sky. 3 more soldiers surrendered, their faces covered in the gray dust of the hill. Treadwell was now an army of 1 with 18 prisoners in his wake. The 6th and final bunker was 40 yards away, isolated on the far end of the ridge. It was the last tooth in the jaw of Hitler's west wall at Nether Warsbach. The last grenade went through the aperture with a final, definitive explosion. 3 more Germans stumbled out, and the firing on the hilltop finally died into silence. Treadwell stood among the captured ruins, his uniform torn and his boots caked in blood. The man who walked through the kill zone had not received a single wound. But the real mystery is how he survived the next 12 days of the war, the narrator says. Fox Company reached the crest and found their lieutenant looking out over Germany. The impossible objective had been taken in less than an hour of focused courage. 1 man had unblocked an entire sector, allowing the Allied advance to resume. Reports of the action reached the 180th Infantry Regiment headquarters by that afternoon. High-ranking officers refused to believe a single man had neutralized 6 pillboxes. They ordered an immediate verification, suspecting the reports were combat exaggeration. But every man in Fox Company told the same story. Treadwell walked, and the bunkers died. The captured German commander provided the ultimate proof of the lieutenant's feat. He described a madman who wouldn't stop coming, regardless of the fire directed at him. The German prisoners corroborated the timeline, stunned by the speed of the assault. Jack Treadwell's name began its journey to the desk of the President of the United States. The breakthrough at Nether Warsbach was a critical piece of Operation Undertone. With the Siegfried Line breached, the path to the Rhine River was suddenly open. The 45th Division moved with a new momentum, chasing a retreating, broken enemy. Treadwell didn't go to the rear for a rest, stayed at the front of his men. The Thunderbirds had been fighting for 511 days, from the beaches to the mountains. They had seen 9 of their brothers earn the Medal of Honor in this war alone. But Treadwell's action was unique in its solitary, sustained, and calculated bravery. He hadn't just reacted to an ambush, he had hunted a fortress and won. 3 days later, the division captured Hamburg as the German resistance crumbled. The West Wall was no longer a barrier. It was a collection of abandoned concrete shells. Treadwell continued to lead from the front, refusing any special treatment for his deeds. He was a soldier's soldier, more concerned with his men than his growing legend. On the 12th day after the pillbox assault, the Treadwell luck finally flickered. Near Rosbach, a German counterattack caught Fox Company in a heavy exchange. Treadwell was wounded, a serious injury that required immediate medical evacuation. He was carried off the field, his war in Europe finally halted by a piece of shrapnel. While recovering in a military hospital, Treadwell met a nurse named Maxine Johnson. She saw the man behind the medals, a quiet hero from Snyder, Oklahoma. A relationship began that would anchor him for the rest of his long life. Even in a hospital bed, The paperwork for his Medal of Honor was moving forward. August 23, 1945, was a day of sweltering heat and immense national pride. The war in Europe was over, and the war in the Pacific was reaching its atomic end. Treadwell stood in the White House, his uniform crisp and his posture perfect. President Harry Truman waited for him with a blue ribbon in his hands. The citation described a whirlwind assault and a courageous willingness to face odds. Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Treadwell's neck and shook his hand firmly. "I'd rather have this medal than be president," Truman famously whispered to the heroes. Treadwell was now part of an elite brotherhood, a symbol of American resilience. The Medal of Honor was just the centerpiece of a staggering collection of awards. He held the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Bronze Star with V. His Purple Heart now had 3 oak leaf clusters, marking 4 separate combat wounds. At 25, he had earned more decorations than most generals earn in a lifetime. Many soldiers returned home to forget the war, but Treadwell couldn't leave it. He felt a deep sense of purpose in the uniform that had nearly been his shroud. He chose to stay in the army, transitioning from a combat leader to a trainer. He wanted to ensure the next generation survived the kill zones of the future. The years passed, and Treadwell rose through the ranks with quiet efficiency. He attended the Army War College, mastering the strategy he once practiced in the mud. He served in Germany, in the Marshall Islands, a guardian of the post-war peace. By 1954, the young lieutenant from the Hill was a colonel in the United States Army. But his greatest challenge wasn't a concrete bunker, it was a jungle, the narrator teases. In 1968, the world was changing, and a new, different kind of war was raging. Vietnam was a conflict of shadows, snipers, and a disappearing enemy. The Army looked to its most decorated veteran to lead men into the green hell. Colonel Jack Treadwell arrived in South Vietnam in October 1968. At age 49, most men his age were playing golf or planning their retirement in the sun. Treadwell was strapping on a parachute and checking his rifle for the second time. He was assigned as the Chief of Staff for the Americal Division in a brutal sector. The young soldiers were awestruck by the man with the Medal of Honor on his uniform. He didn't stay behind a desk at headquarters. He went where the fire was hottest. Treadwell knew that leadership was a physical act, not a memo sent from the rear. He shared the rations, the heat, and the danger with the 11th Infantry Brigade. He completed over 100 combat parachute jumps during his tour in Southeast Asia. At 50 years old, he was still the first man out of the plane and into the unknown. His Vietnam service added 3 more campaign ribbons to his legendary uniform. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 12 clusters. By his retirement in 1974, Treadwell had served his country for 33 continuous years. Military historians began to tally the weight of his service and his sacrifice. They discovered that Jack Treadwell was likely the most decorated soldier in U.S. history. No other man had accumulated such a diverse and high-level array of valor awards. His rack included the Medal of Honor, the DSC, the Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit. He had the Soldier's Medal, the Bronze Star, and 2 combat infantryman badges. The 4 Purple Hearts told the story of a man the enemy tried to kill 4 times. He was a living testament to the survival of the American spirit under fire. He retired to his home state of Oklahoma, the land that had forged his character. He and Maxine raised horses, enjoying the silence of a life no longer punctuated by gunfire. They had 3 daughters, 2 of whom would go on to marry Army officers. The tradition of service in the Treadwell family was far from over. The man who had cleared 6 bunkers now found peace in the rhythm of the ranch. He was a local legend, but he rarely spoke of the morning at Nether Warsbach. To him, it was just a job that needed doing so his men could go home. He had 3 quiet years before his final battle began on an operating table. On December 12, 1977, the heart that had driven him up that hill finally slowed. Complications from an open-heart bypass surgery proved to be the only thing that could stop him. He was only 58 years old, a life cut short by the toll of 2 massive wars. Jack Treadwell passed away in peace, surrounded by the family he had protected. He was buried with full military honors at the Fort Sill Post Cemetery in Oklahoma. A 21-gun salute echoed across the plains, a final goodbye to a titan of valor. His headstone is simple, listing his rank and his Medal of Honor with quiet dignity. But his real monument is the lives of the men who didn't die on that hill. Why does Jack Treadwell's story matter more than 80 years later? Because he showed that one person's decision can override the impossible odds. He didn't have a miracle weapon or a secret plan. He just had a refusal to quit. He walked when everyone else was paralyzed, and in doing so, he became immortal. If you're still watching, it's because you know heroes like this shouldn't be forgotten. We are rescuing these stories from the dusty archives of the national records. Every like and every subscribe helps us tell YouTube that history still matters. Don't let Jack Treadwell's name disappear into the silence of the past. The 45th Division's history is written in the blood of men like Jack Treadwell. They fought for 511 days, more than almost any other unit in the entire war. They saw the worst of humanity at Dachau and the best of it at Nether Warsbach. Treadwell was the personification of the Thunderbird, fierce, loyal, and unyielding. Today, the weapons of the Siegfried Line are rusted relics in glass cases. But the lessons of that morning in 1945 are still taught at West Point today. The Treadwell assault is a case study in aggressive leadership and tactical focus. It proves that momentum is the greatest weapon an infantryman possesses. The concrete bunkers still sit on the hillsides of Germany, overgrown with moss. They look cold and harmless now, a playground for hikers and history buffs. But if you listen closely, the wind still seems to carry the ghost of a Thompson, and the echo of a man who refused to believe that concrete could stop a soldier. Imagine the terror of those German gunners as they saw him keep coming. They had the best fortifications in the world and the best machine guns. Yet they were defeated by a single man with 4 grenades and a steady walk. Morale is the first thing that breaks in a bunker, and Treadwell broke it instantly. No other American soldier has a record that matches Treadwell's diverse valor. Audie Murphy may be more famous, but Treadwell's 33 years of service is unparalleled. He represents the greatest generation at its most humble and its most lethal. He was a man who lived for the mission and died for his country. His legacy lives on in his children and the officers who carry the Treadwell name. They remember him not as a war hero, but as a father who loved horses. The medals were kept in a box, a reminder of a life lived at the edge of the world. But the courage he showed that morning is now part of the American DNA. Our community of history lovers stretches from the US to the UK and Australia. We want to hear your family's stories of service and sacrifice in the comments. Did you have a grandfather who fought in the 45th or served in the Siegfried Line? Your comments help keep these memories alive for the next generation of viewers. The Battle of Nether Warsbach was just one morning in a 6-year global war. But it was the morning that Jack Treadwell decided to change the world. He didn't wait for permission to be a hero. He just took the first step. And that first step led to the liberation of a continent and the end of a nightmare. Every round Treadwell fired was a blow against the darkness of the 1940s. Every grenade he threw was a promise of a better, freer future for all of us. We owe our current peace to the men who were willing to walk through fire. Jack Treadwell was the finest example of that willingness ever recorded in history. The leaders of the war knew that victory depended on the individual lieutenant. General Marshall once said that the Army's strength was its small unit leadership. Treadwell proved that a single officer could do the work of an entire battalion. He was the point of the spear that shattered Hitler's final defensive barrier. The technical design of the pillbox was meant to be the ultimate defense. But Treadwell found the weakness, the narrowness of the aperture itself. He used their own protection against them, turning the bunker into a trap. This is the definition of tactical genius, choosing the enemy's strength as their ruin. The footprints Jack Treadwell left in that frozen mud have long since washed away. But the path he carved through the Siegfried Line is still visible in the history books. He showed us that fear is a choice, and courage is a muscle you have to flex. When the world told him to stay down, Jack Treadwell chose to stand up. The word valor is inscribed on the medal he wore around his neck in 1945. It's a simple word that carries the weight of 21 captured enemies and 6 bunkers. It's a word that describes a man who survived for wounds and 33 years of service. Jack Treadwell didn't just have valor, he was the definition of the word. The survivors of Fox Company never forgot what they saw on that hillside. They told the story to their children and their grandchildren at every reunion. They spoke of the Oklahoma ghost who walked through lead and came out clean. Treadwell's story is their story, the story of men who followed a leader into hell. The sun sets over Snyder, Oklahoma, the town that gave us this legendary soldier. It's a quiet place, but it produced a man who roared on the world stage. We should all be proud that men like Jack Treadwell are among us. They are the silent guardians of our freedom and our history. In Vietnam, the 11th Brigade carried on the tradition of leading from the front. Colonel Treadwell ensured that his officers knew the value of a shared risk. He didn't ask his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself at 50 years old. That is the hallmark of a true commander, from 1945 to the modern day. History is more than just dates and numbers. It is the heartbeat of the people. When we remember Jack Treadwell, we honor every soldier who ever held the line. We honor the 8 men who fell on that hill before the lieutenant stood up. We honor the sacrifice of the families who wait for their heroes to come home. DSC, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross. The list goes on and on. Testament to a life spent in the service of others. But if you ask Jack, he would tell you the best award was the handshake from his men. The respect of those you lead is the only decoration that truly matters in combat. The silence of the cemetery at Fort Sill is a reminder of the cost of our peace. Every headstone there represents a story of courage and a family's love. Jack Treadwell's stone is one of many, but it shines with a special light today. We hope this video has helped you see that light and understand its power. The headlines of 1945 couldn't capture the full truth of what happened that morning. It takes time and perspective to realize the scale of such an individual victory. Treadwell didn't just take a hill. He broke the spirit of the German defense. He showed them that no amount of concrete could stop an American with a mission. Today's soldiers still look to the past for inspiration and guidance in the field. Treadwell's walk is a reminder that the basic principles of war never change. It still takes a person with a gun and a heart to secure a piece of ground. And it still takes a leader who is willing to take the first step into the kill zone. Colonel Jack Treadwell. 1919-1977. American hero. The heart that drove him up that hill finally gave out, but his story beats on. He is a reminder that the impossible is just a word used by the people who quit. Jack Treadwell never quit, and neither will we in our mission to tell these stories. We are uploading new stories of tactical brilliance and heroism every single week. Don't miss our next video on the tank commander who outsmarted an entire Tiger unit. Join our community and help us keep the flame of history burning bright. Your support is the only thing that allows us to do this vital research. From the mud of Nether Warsbach to the White House and the jungles of Vietnam, Jack Treadwell's journey was a 33-year marathon of valor and service. He was a husband, a father, a trainer, and the most decorated soldier of his time. Thank you for joining us on this journey through his incredible, legendary life. He looks like a normal man, but we know what lived inside that olive drab jacket. He was the man who walked through the buzzsaw and came out on the other side. May his courage inspire you to take your own first step, whatever your hill may be. Rest in peace, Colonel. The hill is secured, and the battalion is moving forward. One last time, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. We love seeing how far these stories travel across the globe. It proves that heroism is a universal language that everyone can understand. Thank you for being part of this global community of history enthusiasts. Check out our other videos on the screen now to keep the history marathon going. Next week, the forbidden tactic that saved 400 lives in the Pacific Theater. I'm your narrator, and this has been the story of the ghost of the Siegfried Line. See you in the next one. Out.